as of right now. Ooh, okay. Can we read that up? Second. Okay, so I'm going to start with no. I just goofed everybody. It's okay. I'm going to log it back on. Okay, so Laxita and Abhiram, I know that you have both done proponents, correct? Sorry, I'm going to get to my video. I had it set up.
Is.
Okay, so raise your hand if this is your first one. Like this is your first one. You haven't done either side. Is that anybody here? Oh, good. You've all done one side. Okay. If I'm recording you, can I have your sweet faces on the video? Because I see it. Tanish, I see your ceiling. Thank you. And Ankit, I don't know what I'm seeing. Is that, oh, it's a fan. I'm seeing, wait a minute. Ankit, what's going on, buddy? Oh, there you go. Okay. Thank you. I was like going, where are you? It's like, it's reverse. Hi. Okay. So we're going to talk about opponents now. Those who are opposed to affirmative action. Just a quick reminder what affirmative action is. I'm going to switch gears here just for a second, everybody. I like this. If you look on this document, you have kind of a separate document. What is affirmative action? It is race conscious admissions policies. You know, affirmative action was intended, if you did the proponent side, to give minority groups, disadvantaged groups, really groups who had been subjected to prejudice and discrimination, to give them an opportunity to attend a top tier university. So let me give you an example of past discrimination. In 1920, Harvard discriminated against Jew applicants, and they purposely denied Jewish applicants admission to Harvard. Now, how would they know they were Jewish? I mean, that's a religion. How would they know?
Are they forced to put it on their resume or?
Well, there's a couple things. First of all, their last name, right? Jewish names are pretty specific, like Indian names. I can kind of tell if it's Asian American or Asian Indian. I can tell by the last name. Is there any other way I can tell your personal history, ladies and gentlemen? Think about your application process, everybody. How can I find out about you?
In your essay.
So what you're writing in your college essays is make or break. It is a narrative essay. You tell me a lot about yourself in a narrative. They'll write about, for example, this is a Common App prompt. Write about yourself, write about your, a time that you felt challenged by your belief system. Write about your family. And a lot of what kids do when they're applying to college is they think they can just kind of be themselves, say whatever they want. Yeah, no, I'm going to tell you right now. I know people that have hired a college coach for their essays because your essay is make or break. So this is what Harvard is being accused of. They're using the essay. They're using the personal component to make sure Asians don't get in. Are you with me so far? So they can't deny the Asian American groups are top ranked. They're valedictorians, they're perfect scores on the SAT, they have great extracurricular criteria, but the one way they get them is on their personality. That's the one place they can downgrade them. And yes, they know by their last name, they know by their essay what their ethnicity is. Okay, so I'm going to share a video with you, everybody. Really good one. I hope y'all like it. And notice the speakers. Notice the ethnicity of the speakers.
The greatest university on the planet. Fancy people. A global institution. Privilege that just oozes from every pore of every place that you turn. So cachet, the inner sanctum.
Sorry.
There are rooms within rooms within rooms.
They are intent on cultivating its brand of prestige by any means.
Notice
We
he's
could
Asian
fill our
American.
classes with the very smartest, best performers. But we choose not to.
Diversity pressures are the keenest at the most elite institutions. Why?
When I try to apply to these schools, everyone has this like they know certain unsaid things about the admissions process. And part of the reason I wanted to do this interview was because everyone's like looking for the same story and they don't really care what you have to say. Like, it's always this Asian kid, high test scores, you're mad that he didn't get in, right? I think I'm interested in the way affirmative action is portrayed because it's a very dishonest debate.
They've invented these new admission schemes called holistic admission.
A holistic review. Holistic review. Holistic admission.
Holistic review of an applicant.
As a Trojan horse for discrimination.
They rank applicants on several dimensions: academics, extracurriculars.
They grade people in three things: academics, extracurriculars. Asian Americans, by and large, get much higher academic and extracurricular grades than other races, including whites.
In each of those factors, Asians are in the top rank, except one, the personality ranking, where Asians suddenly drop to the bottom.
Some admissions officers refer to Asians as a kind of
Okay, so I love this graph, everybody, because this makes it quantifiable. So when the Supreme Court heard this and saw this, it's a way of quantifying. How can you prove that Harvard is discriminating? Right? So this is a way to quantify it.
homogenous group, all very similar.
Describing Asians as
Quiet, math or
Disturbing,
science
isn't it,
oriented,
everybody?
Smart.
Test-taking robots with no personalities. If you're an Asian American, you have to score 240 points higher on the SAT to have an equal chance of admissions. Maybe even higher.
Show me an Asian kid with low test scores who gets in because he or she has a fantastic personality. And show me a Black kid with high test scores who doesn't get in because he or she has a poor personality. Such people must exist. Can you find them at Harvard?
Based on my understanding, I think the fact that I'm Asian American plays a pretty big factor into why I was rejected.
But it came to my door.
I think admission officer definitely have, I don't know for sure, but either hard or soft quota on the number of incoming Asian students into the Harvard class in 2025. And I think, again,
Quota,
this
you said.
personality factor that is now a pretty big, plays a pretty big role in the entire holistic admissions process is an invented barrier, actually, an obstacle to target specifically Asian American students to limit the number.
They use the holistic admissions process as kind of like a weapon to balance the makeup of Harvard. Systematically, they receive much worse ratings, Asian Americans, than other groups. Harvard is able to say, oh, that's why you deserve to get in.
If we were skeptical of the institution, we might suspect that they really wanted to discriminate and they wanted cover. So they give themselves a plausible story. Again, I'm not down in the bowels of the details of the quantitative analysis of Peter Arcidiacono. I basically followed his lead.
To the extent that the court's allowed this, it provides you with a way to discriminate. The personal rating is particularly subjective.
Remember, he's not
Asian
associated with
Americans
either
have
one.
Unexplainably low personal ratings. And when I read the files myself, I could see it. Summer before her senior year, her and her mom got hit by a drunk driver, leaving her mom seriously hurt. As a result of issues at home, she spent some time in foster care. And her dad suffered from a severe mental illness. And he writes about all these things. And the only comment that the admissions officer makes is SS. And what SS means is standard strong. If you get that, it's like good, but not good enough.
It's
And that was the end of it. And I don't see how you could possibly give this person low marks on the personal score. There wasn't anything standard about this person's file. I think a lot of it's done on race as a PR front.
Here's my guess. If you just admitted the kids who were the strongest students, Harvard would be 50 or 60% Asian. If they just did it straight up by academic performance, so there wouldn't be enough room for the sons and daughters of alumni.
Oops.
Applicants in my school, which can literally buy their way into whatever university they want, or even just using legacy system because they have generations upon generations of legacy etched into these top schools.
I think getting rid of affirmative action would lead to a pathway to freedom of choice.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Is there a side door? So most of you are going to apply to college and try to get in the front door. That's the typical way. You do everything right. You go to high school and you take your AP courses. You do the best you can on the SAT because it does make a difference. You are involved in extracurricular activities. You want a complete resume. And even that's not enough. Because it's pretty competitive out there. And you all know this. So the average Asian American has to score, according to the video, 240 to 450 points higher on these standardized tests to even have a shot in the conversation. And I hate to burst your bubble, but you're up there too. Indian Americans have to score higher than whites and Blacks and Native Americans to receive the same consideration at the collegiate admission level. That's just what it is. You have a reputation for being the top ranked, which means you have to work even harder, which is why y'all work so hard to begin with. So this Peter Arcidiacono is looking through the applicants, the applications, and who's being rejected and who's being accepted. And he sees something. There are markers that show that discrimination against these Asian Americans, these more qualified applicants, is taking place. Fascinating. And they're getting them in this holistic process. Yes, they score high in academics. Yes, they score high in extracurriculars. But when it comes to who they are, their personality, which is going to come through in the essay, which is going to come through based on their ethnicity, they're downgraded. It's an invented barrier and they are rating them low. So this is what the Student for Fair Admissions group is saying. Look, so many Asian Americans are being denied admissions to Harvard because of affirmative action, because Harvard is holding spots for, and they're saying legacy. Okay, so let me give you an example. Those of you who are with me heard me say the name Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner is Donald Trump's son-in-law, married to Ivanka Trump. When he applied for Harvard, shocker, he wasn't the top of his class. And by the way, he went to an elite private school. He didn't score high on his SAT. So how did he get in? His dad wrote a check for $1.5 million. And you're like, that's not fair. That's illegal. It's not illegal. His dad went to Harvard. His dad is alumni. He wrote a check, an alumni check to Harvard. There's nothing illegal about it. He just happened to write that check right when his son was applying for Harvard. It's a side door. And I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that the system is fair. It is not fair. If you are legacy and your parents are graduates at a university, you get consideration before any other applicant. And then if your daddy writes a big check or your mama, then you really get consideration. Another side door, and believe me, you would take it if you had it, is if you're in athletics. If you have an extraordinary gift, you'll get into Stanford and Princeton and Yale on an athletic scholarship. And guess what? I don't know if y'all know this. They don't even take the SAT. They don't even write an essay. I know someone who was signed her sophomore year at Coppell High School to play golf for Stanford. She never took the SAT. She never wrote an essay. She was signed her sophomore year. She didn't work that hard, right? What's the problem with that? Okay, so let's say you get in the side door. You're Jared Kushner, or you're someone who's a minority that got in through affirmative action. Well, we're arguing the opponent's side. So I want you to go to, well, first, I want you to go to the painful truth about affirmative action. And you should have this in your information. Okay, so what they're saying is, and this is your whole second body paragraph, everybody, there's a mismatch that happens when the playing field isn't based on qualifications, when all these other variables are taken into consideration. Okay, so yes, minorities are admitted to Harvard. A certain percentage of Blacks, Native Americans, Hispanics. Are you ready? They're not the working class. They're not the lower class, which affirmative action was intended for. These are your upper class minorities. So that was not the purpose of affirmative action. So basically, it's kind of a loophole. It's a way for upper middle class minorities to be accepted admissions into these elite schools. That's not what affirmative action was intended for. It was intended to give disadvantaged, marginalized groups a shot at the table, you know, a shot in the game, if you will. So another big mismatch in the system happens when you allow lesser qualified applicants. Okay, so let's say you're an athlete, you get in the side door. Let's say you're Jared Kushner, not quite qualified, but mommy and daddy wrote a check. Let's say you are less qualified minority who got through an affirmative action. They argue, opponents argue, they don't have the academic chops to be competitive in the classroom with all the other valedictorians. You all who work hard, and that's all of you, and let me give you credit today. You are busting your chops to do everything you can. You're doing your homework. You're sitting here on your day off, taking a writing class with me because you care about your academic future. And that means your playing level is up here. Okay, so you're up here at the top of your class, and in come these classmates who are below you, achievement-wise, work ethic-wise. They don't have your college readiness. So what happens to them? And by the way, there's an entire article in the information I gave you from Stanford that talks about what has happened on the campus of Stanford. So they have all these athletes that come in, a lot of them African American, and they go into these classes, and the African Americans start at the same place, and the classes are so hard, these minorities and these less qualified drop to the bottom of the class. Okay, I think you all know, and I'm going to be logical here. When you're at the top of the class, do you hang out with kids at the bottom of the class? No. So the bottom of the class gets isolated. They start to disengage. They form their own little pods on the campus, creating a mismatch. And there's an entire article about what has happened at Stanford. And they oppose affirmative action. They oppose actually, letting students in on the side door. I don't know if you know this, there is a school that even if you are an athlete, you must qualify academically as well. Does anybody know what school that is? You cannot be an athlete and play football at this school. unless you're a top student. Does anybody know what school I'm talking about? Notre Dame. At Notre Dame, if you don't have a high academic ranking, a high score on your SAT, and you play football, you can't get in. And they're known for that, which means they don't get top tier athletes, do they? Because how many top tier athletes can do it all, right? It's really interesting. Very few institutions will do that. So a mismatch happens. You extend to a student a large admissions preference, whether it's athletics or legacy or affirmative action. And then the student finds themselves in a class where they have weaker academic preparation than nearly all of their classmates. The student who's underprepared relative to the class falls behind. His grades continue to fall till he or she is at the bottom of the class, and worse, this causes them to induce panic, self-doubt, making learning even harder. So we have a terrible problem here. You're putting students in a class for which they are not prepared. You're putting them in an environment that is supposed to be diverse, yet they can't assimilate into the environment because they've isolated themselves. And that's exactly what happens with campuses who have affirmative action, right? So opponents say this mismatch is not only harmful to the student, it is harmful to the student body and the future of the campus. Are y'all with me so far? So this is the mismatch. Well, the other strong argument is constitutionality. So I'm going to go to, basically it's the second page. Race has no place in college admissions. This is the Wall Street Journal. And this is written by the crusader of all of this, Edward Bloom. Remember, he is the financier. He is the attorney who took Michael Wang's case in 2015. Edward Bloom is the one who created the nonprofit group Students for Fair Admissions. He is leading the charge. Here's what he says. Students for Fair Admissions presented to the Supreme Court last month a hypothetical case. If you are an Asian American, you have a 25% chance of admission at Harvard, okay? If you are a white person, you have a 36% chance. If you are Hispanic, you have a 77% chance. If you are African American, you have a 95% chance of getting into Harvard. Now, if you're Asian Indian, where do you think you are in that? You're right about where the Asian American is, probably in that 28th percentile, right? Because they have plenty of you to choose from. Yes, there are plenty of smart Indian, Asian kids. Am I right, everybody? There's too many of you, right? It's too selective. Does that seem fair to you? Does it make you a little bit mad? It should. That's the whole point. Harvard has a long and ugly history of discriminating. Remember, I told you in the 1920s, what religious group did they discriminate against? The Jews. They had a holistic admissions criteria, and they allowed only a limited number of Jews. So here's my question, and this is not in here, this is drawing a conclusion. If a university has a history of discriminating in the past, what is the likelihood they would do it again? Right? They want on their campus who they want. Am I right, everybody? So the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, same ugliness in their history. In the 1960s, they didn't even allow Blacks on their campus. And now we're using affirmative action to promote Blacks on their campus, which is ironic. So the Students for Fair Admissions exposed UNC complaining they violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and Title VI of the Civil Rights Acts. It does so by rejecting reasonable race-neutral alternatives to racial preferences, even if those alternatives would have increased the student body's overall racial diversity. It's basically saying they are unfair practices. Is everybody with me? Okay, go to your outline real quick. And most of this I've already kind of told you. This is the most contentious debate right now, everybody. And the Supreme Court is deciding it as we speak. In the next 3 to 6 months, they will rule whether affirmative action ends or doesn't. If you were in class last week, there are already 9 states, including Michigan and California, who have banned it. What does that mean for the remaining states? Well, the Supreme Court can end it. So those who oppose the implementation of affirmative action explain these admissions policies at these elite institutions are outdated. They are unfair, they are unconstitutional, and they create a mismatch impacting the overall student body. Body 1, activists who argue elite colleges who take affirmative action into account during college admissions claim it is not only unconstitutional, it really is a form of reverse discrimination. But this time against qualified applicants. So shouldn't you, ladies and gentlemen, want your best students on a college campus? Shouldn't you want the top students on a campus? That's what they're arguing. Leading the charge is, of course, Edward Bloom, financier and conservative legal activist. Kids check a box with their race, he says. They're judged affirmatively or negatively by competitive admissions officers based upon the box they check. He says this is unfair, illegal, and unconstitutional. And even though there are past rulings that have allowed affirmative action to stay in place, the current litigation against Harvard and UNC specifically claims they are using a racial quota and they are using race as the sole determining factor to eliminate qualified candidates. And that is not what affirmative action was intended to do. So I'm going to go to body 2 is going to be everything I talked about. A second argument supports the idea elite colleges are using affirmative action to purposely consider race as the sole factor, focusing on achievement and college readiness, but this creates a mismatch at the detriment of the student body and the university. These top schools, when they factor in race of these members of minority groups, they're often not disadvantaged at all. These students come from affluent families. They use their race to circumvent the affirmative action criteria and secure themselves a spot at an elite school like Harvard. And these top schools have shown a preference to upper middle class minorities and less priority to lower middle class priorities. And then number 2 is the mismatch, which happens when you put less qualified students on campus with the highest level, it creates a mismatch. And here's an example here at the University of Texas. And then finally, and here's the best argument, we talked last week when we did proponents about what happened at the University of California and the University of Michigan when affirmative action ended. Well, guess what? We only looked at one side of the conversation. Yes, diversity dropped. Native Americans, Hispanics, and Blacks stopped applying to these schools. But here's what happened that they didn't tell you. When affirmative action, the total number of Black and Hispanic students receiving bachelor's degrees was the same before and after. Here's what they didn't tell you. When those minority students who didn't have the chops, who didn't have the requirements, the academic readiness, they dropped out. Yeah, they got in, but they couldn't handle the rigorous curriculum and they dropped out. So when they ended affirmative action, nothing changed with graduation rates. So the minorities that did come in were higher qualified and actually graduated. So they said when a minority student is given preferential treatment for admission, because of their race, this creates a mismatch. And that can be harmful not just to the student, but to the student body that is intended to be diverse. Everybody with me? All right. Any questions about this one? Raise your hand if you've now done both sides. Okay, so what's the answer? What's the answer, everybody? What is the Supreme Court going to decide? Anybody want to guess?
Probably against affirmative action.
It's a no-win, isn't it? This is a no-win. Nobody wins on this one. Yeah. All right. Thank you for coming. And I'm going to stop the recording. If you are finished with the opponent side, I'm about to start proponents. Okay.